Welcome to Beyond the Message, the podcast where we take the weekly teaching at Christ Community Chapel and we bring it into your week. Every week, we sit down together as friends to laugh a little bit, reflect, and to figure out how to live out. See, you guys laughed. Figure out how to live out what it is that we are learning. If you didn't hear the sermon yet, make sure you check that out. Drop down to the description. There's a link to it there, and then come back and join in on this conversation. My name is Stacy, and I'm joined today by Kanan Coffey, Jimmy Cozy, and Lana Chilton. Welcome, guys.
Let's go.
Thanks. This bright and early on this Sunday morning.
Come on.
Sunday.
That's right.
Sunny
They don't know
Sunday.
what time it is. It's Monday afternoon by the time they hear this.
That's right.
well-
I know, but it's okay. We're recording Sunday morning. That's good. Okay, to start things off, get us thinking, just, loosen up a little bit. Wanted to ask you guys, what is a dream you had as a little kid? Not like you dreamt it at night or something, but like something you wanted to be, something you looked forward to as a little kid.
Not a night dream, a daydream.
Yeah.
Something you daydreamed of.
Yes.
I will go.
Go ahead.
Jimmy,
Go.
can
Lana's up, not
May I
you, Jimmy.
go?
Lana.
I dreamt every time my mom or dad would watch the news, I wanted to be a news reporter,
I
a
think
news anchor, a news reporter, and
you would be
I
great
can
at
see it.
that.
thanks.
I can see it.
I get to live the dream with pre-service video announcements. That's me living my
It
little
is.
childhood
There you
dream.
go.
Live it out.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
everybody, whenever you see Lana up there
Yep.
doing
Well, I mean-
pre-service
But
video,
don't ask me.
you could be
anything
writing
about the news.
NBC, ABC, you'd be
but-
saying, you need Lana Chilton.
The irony of this is, don't ask me of any current events
You
or
should
anything
start
in the
like
news
a,
right now. So
like
I
a-
don't. I
You
won't
should
know.
start a TikTok where it's you talking about current events as a news anchor, but since you don't really know what's going on,
That would be fun.
just let it fly.
That sounds
like
like
it.
a good use of time.
That
I like
sounds
it.
That sounds good.
Let's stop this podcast.
Let's
And
go.
start
Pivot.
that
The
Pivot.
Lana
Our
News
pivot.
Podcast.
Jimmy,
Coming
what
to
did
you
you?
next
What's a
year.
dream you had?
I had a few dreams. My first was that most of them are dead, so that's part of this.
Another.
My first was to be a professional baseball player, and I gave up on that for a few reasons, not the least of which is I just decided I didn't like baseball all that much.
Why?
It's slow moving. There's no
It is
clock.
slow.
I know I'm offending every baseball player who's listening to this right now, but maybe you guys should
Keep going.
move around a little bit more, be a little more agile. And then I wanted to be a marine biologist, and hard pivot to marine biologist, and that didn't work out because
If you listened last week, you
I
might
chose
tie
orca,
together
and I have
that
a lot
Jimmy
of good
was the
reasons why
whale
orca
that you
is
wanted to
the
be.
king of all animals, but we don't need to get into that here. At
No,
one
we do
point,
not.
I wanted to try to be a musical artist, so I tried to write a
A lot of
song,
dreams.
Dreams.
but it didn't.
Very different.
Yeah,
You wrote
Wait,
songs?
do you know what the song
I was
was
in
that
like
you-
third grade. I was listening to a lot of DC Talk
He still has
because
them.
my parents wouldn't let me listen to non-Christian
Talk,
music,
Raven.
and so I tried to write a song in the style of DC Talk, but that's not really my anyway. So here I am.
We need that.
We're going to have a podcast
We need to find
just
that.
about Jimmy's dreams as a child.
I will do the TikTok
I'll
if
tune in.
you are a guest and you do
And you
your
play
song.
your song.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in before Kanan because I have one that is so superficial that you guys are going to make fun of it. And then I like hardcore would dream as a child that I would have blonde hair and blue eyes.
What?
Well, Stacey, I've got news for you. These
It
days,
did not come true.
modern
And it would
problems
look
require
really
modern
weird
solutions.
probably.
You could do
I
that.
could. I
You
know,
could find
but
a way.
You shouldn't.
just put yourself in little like 7-year-old
Mm.
Stacy. And
What
I was
were you
like,
hoping to
just
accomplish
I
with
just
this?
thought it was better to have blonde hair and blue eyes.
Which it's
that is
not.
a line of reasoning that has gone really poorly in history.
It has.
Mhm.
So, anyways, then secondly, since Jimmy had like 5,
Mhm.
I'll just add there was probably a season I was very into music. So I would be like, I think I should be a Christian music artist.
Hold on
go.
a second. Hold on a
Let's
second.
go.
Okay.
But she is.
Stacey
No,
is on a recorded album.
Oh, that
You
is right.
toured.
She toured
This
with a
is
musical
very,
group
you guys are
called
making this
Frontline.
sound very different than reality. We're going to jump to Kanan. Kanan, what is a dream
We'll
that
tell
you
you
throw that
had?
later.
link in the-
We'll tell you
in the
later,
description.
Kanan. Yeah.
That's
Link
I
in
got
the
that.
show
I
notes.
got the album on my computer.
That's true. I forgot about that.
No way.
Yeah.
A dream of mine. So I grew up with 3 older brothers, and I grew up in the late 90s where the Chicago Bulls were reigning
Oh, yeah.
champs.
You're big athlete.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so
Nuts.
to be a Chicago Bulls basketball player was the dream as a
Yeah.
kid. The late 90s.
Kinda-
Well, that was
I was going to
very
guess
young.
that one.
Based
that
on
was-
your basketball career, you came the closest to your dreams
I
of
think
anybody
so
at this
too.
table.
Yeah, you did.
I took a good swing, but not
Although
quite to
my
the Bulls.
amateur marine biology is also pretty good. So,
He has a goldfish at home.
that's all right.
No
I
problem.
don't have any goldfish, but I do have a pond in my backyard, and there are fish in it. So
Man, you did. I think you did come the closest.
Close.
You toured. with your
Toured.
basketball life.
Over in
A
Europe.
little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. A little bit.
Kind
A
of
little
lived
bit.
in
Short
Europe.
stint. Short
Kind
stint.
You played professional basketball.
He is
I did.
kind of a big deal,
So
y'all.
you,
For a short
you
stint.
fulfilled your
was
dream.
close.
I mean, not
Came
the
really
Bulls,
close.
but
It's close.
You almost did it.
Some of us toured Europe. Some of us get to do
You could still
pre-service
play
video
for the- you could
announcements.
still
We're
play
all
for the
living the dream.
Bulls.
Let's
Yeah.
go. I could.
okay.
Maybe this.
We're
Windy
going to
City
pivot
Bulls.
again. Once again, we
Hard
were
pivot.
hard pivot
Hard pivot.
into the teaching from this week, which is from John 11. It's the story of Lazarus being raised from the dead, and where Jesus, his I am statement is, I am the resurrection and the life. I loved a few things that Pastor Zach pointed out that I want to start off with. One thing is this whole year is about more life. And I think, for a lot of things, we consider the fact we already have a little bit of life in this area, and then we're expanding that to being more
Yeah.
and believing God for more. And here's a story, though, where we go from zero life, completely dead, to, again, an amazing story of more life and Jesus raising him from the dead. The points that Pastor Zach went through, though, just to frame things up as we start this conversation, is first, death is real, and the reality that death is something that should be grieved. It's not what God intended in creation, but it's because of sin. And so that also spans from physical death to the death of just relationships or dreams or things like that, all sorts of metaphorical things that we can see take a turn in our life or die in our life. And the second point was just that resignation is real. And this was really great to think through the ways that as Christians, we can sometimes put off the idea of the resurrection as this kind of moment in time or something that's an eternal thing, that we're all going to have this future hope that's amazing, without acknowledging that God's promises are for us today. And then the resurrection is real. Pastor Zach had this jar analogy, which we'll talk about more, and that the resurrection is a being, is a person. It's not just this moment in time. So we're going to jump on into that. To start things off, I wanted to think about the promises that God has for us, because as Christians, I do think we can put off and say, oh man, we know things are going to be great, but we can be resigned to the reality that this is just the way things are in our life. So what are some things, when you think about who God is, the truth of this, that God does promise us in the here and now? I don't know. Lena, do you want to start things off?
The first thing that came to my mind is in Revelation 21, where Jesus says, I am making all things new. And even, Paul says in Corinthians, in 2 Corinthians 2, how we are being transformed from one degree of glory to another. That is simultaneous to death happening all around us, and sometimes death happening in us. And so those things being true, that he has promised that. He is in the process of making things new, those things that are his. And so that means us too, even while we're going through death. And so that can be relationships, that can be hopes, that can be bodies. He can do that. He does sometimes do that on this side of our physical death. So that's what came to my mind, is that he is actively making us new even while we're grieving.
Yeah, I think sometimes I feel like if I compare and contrast Mary and Martha in this story, they're really interesting to me, because I feel like Mary's super emotional when she says, if you had only been here. She's raging at Jesus.
Yeah.
Martha, I feel, is just she's like me. She's being more sarcastic and logistical and operational. Just oh, look who showed up. You're finally here, but let's not open the grave because it's going to smell bad. Let's not do that. And I think, when it comes to God's promises, I tend to think future oriented. Those are for eventually, those will eventually be fulfilled, things and some of that is maybe background related. I grew up in a pretty traditional Christian background where it was drilled into you that the idea of kind of you don't want to be a health and wealth person. You don't want to be oh, God's blessing is going to be material. And so I think the rebound from that is to assume that there's no material promise keeping in the day to day. It's they're always off in the future, and it's this sort of stoic martyrdom that you live in. And I think that's so for me, when I think about God's promises, I think what I have to reconcile with myself is to actually believe that those are not just for 60 years from now when I'm dead physically and I'm in heaven, but actually there are things that he's going to bring today that he can and will and wants to today. Yeah. And that's a different way of thinking for me.
Yeah. I think Paul talks about it in Romans 8:28. That I think that just comes to mind a lot, that he is working all things together.
Yes.
Not one day it'll all be
like
worked
he
together,
will work.
it's happening now.
Actively. Yeah.
And how often I just don't think about that. I'm like, no, there's no way that there's an ounce of goodness in what he's doing right now in the midst of whether it is physical death or spiritual death, whatever it is. There's a process, and he is at work right now. And so, with that mindset, we can see him moving in every single area, and we don't have to think like, okay, it'll happen once we get to this point, but it's currently, to your point, it's happening right now.
Yeah.
I think it's also, for me, somewhat of a defense mechanism. And what I mean by that is like, if there's a jar that we're going to get to the jar analogy, I'm sure, in a little bit, but a jar that needs to be popped open, and I feel like there's no other way. I think it's easy to hedge on that and be like, well, if it's your will, God, if you want to do it, go ahead and do it. But we trust you if you don't. You're still good if you don't. He's like, I know, I was still good all along.
That's right. Yeah.
But I think sometimes that for me is less about trying to honestly talk about and to God, and more about covering up for the fact that I don't actually believe he's going to do it.
Right. Well, and that dishonoring God by praying in that type of way was that. I know that one hit me, which we'll maybe talk more about that. I think I was connecting a couple things a couple weeks ago. I think it was Zach that talked about just kind of that day in and day out, just stream of prayer and conversation with God. And so when I was thinking about promises in Scripture, about God's presence, about his promises of wisdom, about his strength being made perfect in my weakness. And I know those can maybe feel like abstract things, but I do think that continual conversation with God around those types of things can bring just a reality to that, because first of all, your relationship with God is going to become more and more intimate and close, and you will see him at work in your life. But those are real promises. He is with us. He will give us wisdom. He will provide us with the strength we need, and more and more and more. There's so much more to that. So.
Yeah. And I think that kind of continual conversation is going to, you're going to be more likely to ask for the jar to be open, to talk about the jar. I know we're going to get to the jar, but you said we can dishonor God by not asking. Yeah. And maybe that's about a comfort level thing. We aren't even getting close to talking about whatever that is, because we're just on this superficial check-in. Yeah. As Joe said last week, consulting with him, but not really communing with him.
Yeah. Well, let's take a minute and look at this clip where Pastor Zach does talk about kind of the jar analogy, and we'll jump in to talk about that.
Church, hear me on this. When Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, he is saying to us, hand me the jar. Hand me the jar. You see, there are two ways we can get this wrong. The first is, I'm not telling you that every dead thing we give to Jesus, he will raise to life. I'm not telling you that every dead marriage can be saved, that every dead family relationship can be rescued, that every dead dream can be revived. It would dishonor God if I did that. Here's one way you know that isn't true. If that were true, Lazarus would be preaching the sermon tonight. You see, he gets up this time, but he doesn't get up next time. I can't write you a blank check and promise you resurrection in every form you want it. We would dishonor God if we said that. But can I tell you something, church? You ready for this? There's another way to dishonor God. And that is to never ask. To never hand him the jar. To believe that all the good things he has for you, all the power he has for you is in the future and is totally irrelevant today.
So to just kind of press into that a little bit, why do you think we approach God, or we can't approach God as if, again, it's the jar, it's, hey, 5:00 is past and that's when the jar needed to be open, so therefore dinner's not going to happen. Why, instead of handing over the jar to God, or just press into that and that illustration a little bit?
I think no. Oh, sorry, Kanan.
You go.
I just,
somebody go.
No's hurt. Like, to hear no, it hurts. It
really
hurts, and as I listened to that from Zach on Thursday night, I just thought about our fertility journey and how we had, for 5 years, like, could we could we have a child, and asking God for this child and praying and trying to come to a place of contentment if he left the jar closed. And then he did a miracle in my body and we had a child. And then I thought, oh, we got a yes. Now it's all yeses. And we bought a minivan because God's going to fill this van with kids because he said yes.
Right.
But what ended up happening was he said yes that time. And then he said no. And then he said no. And then he said no. And so no's hurt, but I think that's part of relationship is, it's still, even that particular thing in my heart, when it gets pressed into a little bit, it still hurts, even though it's been healed. Does that, I don't know. So I just think I can say that in a couple of things in our lives, I think it has been hard to hand it over to him because if he says no, it hurts and you don't want to feel the hurt. I don't know. It's better to kind of self-protect and go, I can list 1,000 reasons why he's just going to say no. And so I'll just be content. What were you going to say, Keenan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's two ways that I think about it in terms of giving the jar to him to open. One, I think simply I overthink it sometimes and I just say, wait, is this something that he wants me to try to figure out on my own? And then I overthink it and I just make it all about me and then realize, why isn't anything happening? And realizing I didn't even invite him to open the jar. I didn't even give him the opportunity to do that. And, to shepherd me, like we talked about last week, I didn't even give him a chance to do that. And I think on the other side of it, it's like this, for me, having a sports background, this thing like, okay, if he's not opening it, then I need to figure out a way to do it. Like which ties in a little bit, but it's like, I'm going to force it to happen.
I should have opened that jar myself.
Correct. Yeah. I don't know. I think there's slightly different way I think about that in terms of, I gotta earn it. I gotta figure out self-reliant. I think those two things tie together, but making it more about me and not really even, dishonoring him by saying, nope, I can do this. I'll figure out a way no matter what it takes.
Yeah. I think with something Lana said, for me, it's self-protection. It is, that is like the symptom, the root cause of which is, not having enough faith.
Yes.
And I think it's like, if you think about like a 4-box grid, it's like one box is expect a yes, get a yes. Then there's expect a yes, get a no, expect a no, get a yes, expect a no, get a no. Like expect a no, get a no doesn't hurt. Expect a no, get a yes is great. Expect a yes, get a yes is, well, that's what I thought would happen. So I'm just trying to avoid that box of expect a yes, get a no. But I think I'm so afraid of that box and protecting myself from that. I will just default to, all God's promises are in the future. I'm not going to hand this over.
It's safe there, right?
It is extremely safe
there. We know
it's
safe there, but in the present, it's like, okay, I could feel disappointment still in this.
Right.
But so to press into that more, thanks for sharing what you shared, Lana. Like that is very powerful. I think there's a lot of people that exist in a space where they have something in their life that has felt that way.
Sure.
But I think the truth is that God's goodness is true in yeses and in nos, but it doesn't always feel that way, right? So how can we help think about that now? How can we help people listening think about that now? You shared an experience of that. I don't know. Any amazing wisdom here?
I'll share 2 quick things I'd love to hear from you guys. One, as you were talking, Jimmy, I thought that was such a great way to explain it. So let's acknowledge that, but as let's encourage one another as a community, though, that's the reality, but we can press in together for more. We have people in our congregation now. We're asking God to heal them physically, right? And I think we can share testimonies of those that have been healed physically, but God wants to be asked to open the jar, even if we're risking hearing a no. So I just think one way is to push each other, to remind one another, to ask big things of God. But he could still say no. And I was just thinking about this passage of scripture over the last couple of days. It's in Romans 5. And, Paul is talking about how through him, we've obtained access by faith into a grace in which we stand. It's like this beautiful passage about how good his promises are and how great the grace is. And we stand in this. But then he makes this pivot. But not only is that true, he says, not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings. And I want to be really careful not to paint this as a, we're going to rejoice in our sufferings, because this is the work. It's knowing that suffering will produce endurance, and endurance will produce character, and character produces hope, and hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. That is around the circumstance I just shared about. That has been the reality, and it is what I still cling to. And it's not a hope that I'm going to get pregnant next week. I don't, you know, like, yeah. But it is a hope that what he has decided to say yes to is exactly what he knows is best. And it produces a character in me that I believe I would not have been able to gain any other way.
I love that passage. I shared my no that, you know, no's can. The no that I have was I was just thinking about the reality of when my dad passed away like a year ago. That's the verse that I shared at his funeral. But the reason is I felt like in that no, I was able to. It was so God's presence was so real, and the reality of that truth of like seeing what suffering did and what it produced, and then and I'm going to forget the order of all of the things, but ultimately hope became so like physically real to me.
I remember you saying
and that it was so true. I was able to see God's goodness. Now, again, my dad had lived a very long life. It's very different than different pains and hurts that people have when they're in their teens or 20s or 30s, right? But the reality is his goodness is true. And sometimes it's whether we feel it or not, right? And I think that's the other tension to point to is that to continue to grow as we pursue Christ in a way that we can realize our feelings can sometimes
they deceive us.
They deceive us, yeah. So, but
yeah, I can speak to that too. I think, you know, we talked about it earlier, but I had this dream of playing basketball and playing it as long as I could. And there came a point in time where it felt like there's a shift from basketball into what was next, and you know, not really. That was my dream, and I felt like it was a healthy dream. You know, I feel like there was, you know, there was a reason I wanted to do it. I had a lot of goals and all those things. Worked hard, but I got to this point where I had to recognize, okay, my dreams might be healthy dreams, but they might not be the dreams that God has for me. And that was a pivotal point for me of just realizing, okay, those no's might not necessarily be like, oh, those dreams are gone. It's just new dreams have been forming and taking place, and recognizing those as being the ones that actually matter. And so holding dreams loosely, I think, is a really challenging concept while still pursuing them. Yeah. But yeah, just trusting that whether they shake out or not, that again, God's working all things together for us. Yes. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, to wrap things up, I just thought, so Pastor Zach does a Q&A, and after the 7:30 service, Pastor Joe does it as well. But in that, it reminded me of something I feel is true that I can speak to as well. And that's just that there are jar popping moments happening all the time. And sometimes as Christians, like, it's so important, again, we talk about a lot on here, to be in community, because in knowing other people, seeing other people's stories, you can increase even your faith to trust in his goodness, even when yours might be one that is not feeling awesome right now, right? So when I look around a room on a Thursday, on a Sunday, I feel like it's amazing because of just the relationships I have, the job that I have, that I can look around a room and point to probably dozens of people that I'm like, wow, God healed that marriage. Man, the mental health battle that person went through and how God has restored them right now. Man, the physical healing of cancer that person experienced, that there's no other explanation besides God. So I don't know if there's any other jar popping, but just as an exercise of even increasing our faith in this moment as we head out to the week, anything else you'd want to press into in that?
It might feel like, you know, what this question made me think about what happened at church last week, where, you know, we baptized a bunch of people, and I did some of the baptizing. And there was one particular point, I think it was during the 11:45 service, where I realized that I was baptizing a daughter and then a mother and a father back to back to back, just like an entire family. Popped. Like their jar has been.
Yeah.
That's sweet.
It just got me to thinking about, you know, like, well, maybe this is another way to say it. My dad came to faith in Jesus watching a televangelist like 40 years ago. And I was just thinking about the generational impact of that popping jar, you know, what that means for me, for my brother and sisters, for you know, 19 or whatever grandchildren now, where like, save for that one moment, who knows? Would I exist? Would I wouldn't be following Jesus? But it also went backward. Like, he led his parents to Christ. And it's, and just thinking about that, you know, thinking about what the significance of those three people being baptized last week, who knows what that could be.
That's
right. But generational popping of jars that could be reverberating for decades. And it's just amazing to see.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's great. Well, that's pretty amazing. I think we'll wrap things on that note. It's been great to be together. Can't wait for next week. We have a couple more weeks at least, and 2 weeks till Easter. So pretty pumped about that. But thanks for joining me.
Yeah.
Until next time. Thanks so much for tuning in to Beyond the Message. Before you head out, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss next week's content. And all week long, we want to provide you opportunities to grow right where you are. So check out our YouTube channel, our app for more opportunities to catch content from Christ Community Chapel. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.